Chapter 1: The Forest That Doesn't Exist on the Map. My name is Jack Linden, and I've always considered myself a skeptic. Stories about cursed places, ghosts, and strange phenomena seemed like nothing more than tall tales for thrill seekers. But that was before I decided to enter a forest that, according to locals, doesn't exist. I stumbled upon a few mentions of it online. People called it the Void Forest. It wasn't marked on any official map, but many claimed they had stumbled upon it by accident while wandering through the remote areas of Redstone National Park in Washington. Each story was creepier than the last. "Jack, are you getting yourself into trouble again?" my friend Anthony asked when I told him about my plan. "It's just a forest," I waved him off. "All those stories about people seeing themselves or getting trapped in time. Nonsense." Anthony looked uneasy. "I've heard about that forest. A guy I know said his brother went in and never came back. It's dangerous." "That makes it perfect for me. I'll snap some photos, shoot some video, and write an article," I said confidently. The next day, I packed my backpack with essentials: food, water, a compass, and a flashlight. I also brought my phone with downloaded maps, though I knew there'd be no signal. Arriving at the entrance to the national park, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. Not because I believed in the legends, but because this was a chance to uncover something unusual. The path to the forest led through dense thickets of firs and pines. At first, everything seemed normal. But the deeper I went, the quieter it became. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, not even a whisper of wind in the treetops. It was unsettling. Then I noticed the first sign that this place was unlike any other. On one of the trees was a carved symbol, a spiral with jagged lines extending from it. It looked far too deliberate to be random. "Probably just some bored hikers," I muttered, though I felt a twinge of unease. As I walked further, I saw more symbols etched into the trees. They grew increasingly intricate, resembling a language I couldn't understand. Finally, I reached a place that matched the descriptions from the forums. A thick wall of trees rose up, creating what looked like a portal into darkness. The trunks were covered in moss, and it seemed no human had touched them in years. I took my first step inside. Darkness enveloped me instantly, even though the sun was still high in the sky. Light simply couldn't penetrate the dense canopy above. The air grew heavier, and the earthy scent was far more intense than anywhere else I'd been. After walking for a few minutes, I decided to take a break. Placing my backpack on the ground, I pulled out my phone to check the map. As I expected, there was no signal, and the GPS showed I was standing in the middle of nowhere. "Perfect spot," I said to myself, snapping a few photos. But when I looked at the pictures, something made my blood run cold. In one of the shots aimed at the forest, a silhouette was visible. A human figure stood between the trees, though I was certain no one had been there when I took the photo. I glanced up and looked in that direction, but the figure was gone. "Just a glitch," I mumbled, though my heartbeat quickened. I continued deeper into the forest, but something felt different. My shadow began moving out of sync with me. When I stopped, it kept walking forward, as if it had a life of its own. "What the hell?" I whispered, taking a step back. The shadow stopped and slowly turned its head toward me. That was the moment I realized I had made a terrible mistake. But it was too late. Ahead, the forest stretched endlessly. Behind me, the path I had taken had vanished. I was trapped. Chapter 2: Shadows That Know Your Name. I stood in the middle of the forest, staring at my shadow, which was no longer just a reflection. It moved independently of me, tilting its head as if studying me. "This is impossible," I muttered, but my words felt weak, like a whisper lost in the oppressive silence. A chilling cold seeped into my bones, though the air was stiflingly warm. Forcing myself to look away, I took a step forward, trying to ignore the strange phenomena surrounding me. I had only walked a few meters when I heard it, a sound somewhere between a whisper and a sigh, coming from deep within the forest. Jack. I froze. My name. It wasn't just the wind or the creaking of trees. Someone had spoken my name. Who's there? I shouted, but the only answer was my echo. Suddenly, the forest around me shifted. The trees seemed taller, their trunks closer together, creating the sensation of being trapped. Resolving to keep moving, I pressed forward, hoping to find a way out. But each step felt endless. As I passed one of the trees, my eye caught those strange symbols again. But this time, they were moving. The lines and spirals morphed and twisted as if someone were actively redrawing them in real time. I reached out, hesitant yet curious, and touched the bark. The moment my fingers made contact, I was overwhelmed by a vision. I saw people walking through this forest, just as I was. Their faces were contorted with fear, their voices dissolving into the darkness. Some screamed, others whispered or prayed. Then I saw the shadow. It stalked them, slowly, relentlessly. Its movements were unnatural, and its gaze, though empty, radiated a sinister intelligence. The vision vanished, leaving me back in the forest. The symbols on the tree now glowed faintly with an eerie green light. "This place is toying with me," I said aloud, trying to calm my racing heart. I trudged on. The compass I had brought spun uselessly, pointing in every direction at once. My phone was equally futile, its screen black, as if swallowed by the same darkness that permeated the forest. Soon, I stumbled upon something unusual, a circle of stones arranged in the middle of a clearing. At its center lay an old metal lantern, still faintly glowing, as if someone had left it there moments ago. Someone's been here, I thought, though every instinct screamed that it was a trap. As I stepped closer, the forest erupted into sound. Footsteps echoed all around, whispers filled the air, and I heard voices calling my name. "Jack! Jack, over here!" I spun around, but there was no one there. The voices came from all directions, shifting from friendly to menacing in tone. Out of the forest emerged a figure. It looked like me, the same height, the same build, even wearing identical clothes. The only difference was its eyes, hollow and empty, and its face, grotesquely distorted, as if it had melted. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I am you, Jack," the figure replied, its voice eerily similar to mine but warped and sinister. It stepped closer, and I instinctively backed away. "What do you want?" "You already know," it said, reaching out a hand. "The forest has chosen you." I turned and ran. Running was almost impossible. My legs felt leaden, and the air grew thick and suffocating. Behind me, I could hear footsteps, quick and closing in. Finally, I saw something ahead. It was a cabin, old and dilapidated, but its door stood open. I bolted inside and slammed the door shut behind me. Gasping for breath, I looked around. The cabin was empty, but something about it felt wrong. Mirrors stood in every corner, and in each one, I saw my reflection. But the reflections didn't mimic my movements. They were smiling. Chapter 3: Mirrors that Peer into the Soul. I stood in the center of the cabin, gasping for breath. The mirrors surrounding me were old and tarnished, their surfaces marred with cracks as though they had borne witness to horrors long past. My reflection in them was no longer natural, it lived a life of its own. In one mirror, my face looked aged and haggard, deep wrinkles etched across my forehead and beneath my eyes. In another, I saw myself with hollow eyes and a sinister smile that oozed a black, tar-like substance. It's just an illusion, I told myself, though fear gripped my chest like an iron vice. The oppressive silence was broken by a whisper. It came from everywhere at once, as if the mirrors themselves were speaking. You've seen what you could become, the words were distant yet eerily close. You will become one of us. I stumbled backward, accidentally brushing against one of the mirrors. Its cracks deepened but didn't shatter. And then, in its fractured surface, I saw something new, a figure standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Yet, the suffocating feeling of another presence grew stronger with each passing second. Is scaring me all you've got? I shouted, trying to drown out the whispers. Is that your big game? At my outburst, the mirrors began to move. They shifted away from the walls, almost as if alive, slowly encircling me. The reflections within no longer mirrored my movements. They stood perfectly still, staring back at me with empty eyes. You are choosing your fate, Jack, said the whisper, now merging into a deep, resonant voice. I'm not playing your game. I yelled, clenching my fists. But the mirrors didn't relent. They closed in, and I watched as my reflections began to distort. Their faces stretched into grotesque, unnatural smiles, their eyes became voids, and their skin turned pale, nearly translucent. One of them spoke. We were all like you once. We all thought we could escape. I searched desperately for an escape, but the mirrors had formed an unbreakable barrier around me. The air grew dense, each breath a battle. Then one of the reflections extended a hand through the glass. It looked like my own hand, but the fingers were unnaturally long, the skin scaly and inhuman. Do you want to know the truth, Jack? The reflection asked, leaning closer. I didn't answer. Your choice has already been made. The forest chose you. A thought struck me like lightning, the book. The symbols. They had to be a key, or a trap. But I couldn't just stand and wait for whatever fate the mirrors had planned. If this is your game, I'll make my own rules, I muttered, summoning all my strength. I grabbed a stray piece of wood from the floor and hurled it at the largest mirror with all my might. The mirror exploded into 1,000 shards, and the entire room trembled as though reality itself had fractured. The fragments hovered in midair, drawn together as if by an unseen force. For a moment, everything was still. But instead of disappearing, the shards reassembled into a new shape, a doorway, its frame glowing with a soft, ethereal white light. I didn't hesitate. I opened the door and stepped through. I found myself on a moonlit clearing. It felt like a place outside time and space. Trees formed a semicircle around me, and at the center stood a stone engraved with the spiral symbol I had seen on the trees earlier. Before the stone stood a figure. It didn't move, but I knew it was waiting for me. Jack, it said, its voice a chilling blend of everyone I had ever known. Welcome to the truth. Chapter 4, The Truth Hidden in the Darkness. The figure near the stone stood motionless, yet I could feel its gaze. Draped in a dark cloak that blended seamlessly with the surrounding shadows, its face was concealed by a deep hood, revealing only 2 faint red glimmers, its eyes, piercing through the darkness. Who are you? I demanded, trying to mask my fear. You know who I am, the figure replied, its voice calm and cold like a winter wind. I am your beginning and your end. My heart pounded wildly. This isn't real. It's just my imagination. I shouted, though deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The figure laughed, a low, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. In this forest, imagination and reality are one and the same, Jack. You've already realized that. The figure extended a hand toward the stone with the spiral, and I watched as the symbol began to glow. It emitted a faint green light, pulsing like a heartbeat. This is the center, the figure said. The place where all paths converge. I took a step closer, unsure why. It felt as though this stone held some answer for me. But the closer I got, the heavier the air became, and my legs felt rooted to the ground. What is this place? I asked. This is the forest, the figure replied. It lives and breathes, and it has chosen you. As I moved closer, new symbols began to emerge on the stone. They resembled the ones I'd seen on the trees, but now they were shifting, forming intricate patterns. You have a choice, the figure said, its voice changing. It now sounded like my own. A choice? What kind? I asked, anger and fear warring within me. To stay, or to leave? I want to leave, I said instantly, without hesitation. Then pay the price, the figure replied. At that moment, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and black smoke billowed from beneath the stone. It coiled around me, binding my arms and legs like chains. The smoke began to form images. Scenes from my life appeared before me, moments of joy and happiness, followed by memories I had tried to forget. My first major failure, arguments with loved ones, losses I couldn't prevent. What is this? I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. This is your life, Jack, the figure said. You see your fears, your weaknesses. To leave, you must leave all of this behind. How can I leave it? This is me, I replied, but the smoke only tightened its grip. The stone began to spin. The spiral on its surface deepened, creating the illusion of infinite depth. The figure extended its hand toward me. Look into the spiral, Jack. If you are ready to leave your life behind, I will show you the way out. Leave my life behind. I recoiled, but the black smoke held me in place. Does that mean death? The figure remained silent, its hand still outstretched. My heart wavered between fear and despair. And if I refuse? I asked. Then you will remain here. Your shadow will wander this forest forever, as has happened to those before you. I glanced around. The shadows among the trees seemed closer now, moving between the trunks, watching me. Choose, Jack, the figure said. Time is running out. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The spiral on the stone glowed brighter, spinning faster. The closer I got, the tighter the smoke gripped me, making me believe this might be the end. I won't leave my life behind. I shouted, summoning all my strength. The figure only smiled. Then you will stay with us. Chapter 5, The Price of Freedom. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and each step toward the stone grew heavier. The black smoke thickened, wrapping around my throat and making it nearly impossible to breathe. The figure near the stone remained still, its head merging with the surrounding darkness, its eyes glowing like twin red embers. Jack, the voice shifted again, now sounding like my mother's, but cold and devoid of life. Why are you hesitating? What do you want from me? I shouted, struggling to break free from the smoky grip. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised a hand, and the spiral on the stone began spinning faster. It was as if reality itself was fracturing around me. I felt my legs being pulled toward a vortex created by the stone. A strange force compelled me forward, despite my every effort to resist. My head spun, and it felt as though time had frozen. Don't you understand? The figure's voice whispered. You've already paid the price. The forest has chosen you, and you will never leave as you were. You're lying. I shouted, summoning every ounce of strength I had. This is all an illusion. My words elicited a dry, hollow laugh, and the figure vanished into the darkness, leaving me alone with the stone, which now glowed with a blinding green light. The darkness around me shifted, transforming into scenes from my life. I saw myself as a child, losing my first friend over a senseless argument. I saw myself shouting at my father during one of our final conversations, his face etched with disappointment. Enough. I screamed, covering my face with my hands. But the scenes kept changing, each more painful than the last. Then, my shadow appeared. It stood at the center of one memory, staring at me with empty eyes. Finally, it spoke. "You can never escape yourself, Jack. You are just like me." I mustered all the strength I had left, raised my head, and shouted, "You won't break me." Fueled by a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed the largest fragment of stone lying at my feet and hurled it directly into the spinning spiral. The spiral on the stone abruptly stopped, and its light extinguished. The darkness surrounding me began to recede, and I felt the smoke loosen its grip, dissipating into the air. The figure reappeared before me, but this time, without its hood. Its face was my own, but grotesquely distorted. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth twisted into a sinister grin, and its skin was cracked like porcelain. "You broke the circle, but that doesn't mean you're free," the doppelganger said. "The forest isn't just a place, it's a part of you. Get away from me." I shouted, raising the stone fragment again, ready to strike. The doppelganger vanished, dissolving into the air. The darkness began to melt away, and ahead of me, a path illuminated by moonlight appeared. This was my chance. Without thinking, I ran. Each step echoed loudly, and I could feel something chasing me. I didn't dare look back, knowing that one glance could cost me everything. The path led me to a clearing where I had first entered the forest. But now, everything looked different. The trees were scarred, the ground littered with fragments of stone and glowing symbols. Before me stood a door, carved from pale wood and etched with golden runes that glowed with a soft light. "This is my way out," I whispered, reaching for the handle. I burst onto the road near the entrance to the national park. The sun was rising, and the world looked familiar. But something felt off. I turned to look back, and the forest seemed calm, as if nothing had happened. I pulled out my phone, its screen flickered to life, and the GPS began working again. But as I glanced at my reflection in the dark screen, a chill ran through me. My eyes. They were hollow. Chapter 6: The Line Between Reality and Nightmare. Standing on the roadside, I tried to convince myself it was all over. Sunlight pierced through the trees, wrapping me in its warmth, but I no longer trusted my senses. Something within me had changed. I glanced at my phone again. My reflection on the screen still showed my face, but the eyes, they remained hollow. "It's just exhaustion," I told myself. "Just stress." I began walking along the road, hoping to find someone who could help me. But even at a distance, I could feel the shadow watching me. When I reached the town, everything seemed normal. People walked the streets, children played in yards, cars sped along the roads. But I noticed the small things. People passing by avoided meeting my gaze. Their smiles faded quickly, as though they sensed something unsettling when they looked at me. In a cafe, I asked for water. The waitress's hand trembled as she set down the glass. "Have you come back from somewhere?" she asked, her eyes filled with unease. "Just a hike," I replied, though I didn't believe my own words. She said nothing more, quickly stepping away. In my hotel room, I stood before the mirror. It was simple, unbroken, with no signs of tampering. Yet as I stared at my face, it began to change. My skin paled, losing all color, and my eyes turned black, like bottomless voids. Behind me, shapes began to emerge, the same figures I'd seen in the forest. They didn't move. They just stared. "You never left, Jack," a voice said from the mirror. "That's not true. I'm here. I'm in the real world." "You can believe that," the voice replied, "but you left part of yourself in the forest. And it has taken that part forever." I stepped back from the mirror, grabbed my phone, and began searching for information about the forest. There were no mentions of strange occurrences or missing people. It was as though everything that had happened existed only in my mind. The next morning, I decided to return to where it all began. Standing at the forest's edge, I saw that it looked different now. The trees were dry, the ground cracked, the air lifeless. On the ground, I spotted a fragment of stone with the same symbols etched into it. Picking it up, I heard a whisper. "We are always with you." I dropped the stone and ran back to the town. But even there, among the crowds, I could feel the forest watching me. Months passed. I moved away, changed my phone, and tried to start over. But at night, I hear the whispers. Sometimes, I see flashes of red eyes in the mirror. Every time I think it's all behind me, the forest reminds me it's not. You will never leave, Jack. I don't know how much time I have left, but one thing is certain: if the forest chooses you, it never lets you go.